I'll let them know. So today, Sloane Murray is going to present his dissertation research to us. My relatively recent experience with this is that it seems to be better to go all the way through with a presentation and then take questions at the end. So if there's things that don't make sense, I mean, we can interrupt, but it seems like a lot of the questions get answered. So then we can go back. So if there's a slide that is like, then make a note of that in your head or somewhere, and then we can go back because it does seem like things can get somewhere. All yours.
All right, well, first of all, thank you all for coming. My dissertation is on the teaching methods in online and face-to-face classrooms, for those of you that don't know. For those of you that aren't familiar with the proposal and the study itself, the issue with the subject teaching methods in online and face-to-face classrooms is that there's not a lot of literature on specific methods that are used to help students get to certain learning outcomes, which creates the need for more literature in that area. And also they provide some examples such as peer moderations and team-based learning activities, which are things that can get students engaged. But there's not really any tie to how they help students, how they acknowledge certain learning preferences in the classroom, because the literature says that students have certain learning preferences that they'd like to be addressed to help them learn more effectively. Keep in mind that just because instructors are implementing things that that students like isn't just because they're doing things because students like them. They're implementing things that are likely to help students learn and to keep students engaged. For those of you that don't know, for the last slide, the peer moderations are activities where students are actually leading the learning activity. So it's not necessarily the instructor facilitating, it's the student that's that might be standing up in front of the class, just kind of facilitating that there might be a discussion or some type of learning activity where the students are exchanging ideas rather than the instructor giving them information. So it says that students, another issue is that students have these preferences that they feel like need to be addressed, and they keep the students interested in the actual material. So these can be in the form of discussions, activities, Q&A sessions, lectures, different activities that are implemented throughout the class. There's not much literature on specific methods that can be used in the classroom to accommodate these needs, these learning needs. And understanding what these preferences are could help instructors discern more ways to implement those things in the classroom moving forward. So the purpose of this study is to understand the teaching methods used in face-to-face and traditional and online classrooms that keep students engaged and also help them achieve particular learning outcomes within the course. Overall research question is what strategies are being used to foster engagement and ensure that students are reaching specific learning outcomes in face-to-face and online settings. We're going to get back to that research question towards the end of the presentation. But this information in this study will help instructors develop ways to implement activities that will help students get to particular learning outcomes, and it should help them design ways to address students' learning preferences and keep them engaged moving forward. If nothing else, it should help them design ways to identify ways to make the classroom more productive. So for my conceptual framework, I combined the classroom practice diagnostic framework on your left with the community of inquiry model on your right. So the community of inquiry model explains that a positive learning experience takes place through the interaction of those three elements. Your social presence, which is the interactions between students, communication that takes place in the classroom, and things of that sort. The cognitive presence, which is learning application, students being able to apply what they learn to their assignments and things of that sort to demonstrate what they know. And then your teaching presence, which is how the instructor facilitates their classroom, whether that be communication, whether that be the activities they use, different things to try to facilitate that learning experience. And so those elements can go into domain B and domain C in the CPDF, which is on your left. So this model on your left explains that It's a model that it demonstrates how instructors can basically move through the elements in that model to determine where the inefficiencies lie in their strategies and what they do in the classroom. So the instructor first starts out, he or she evaluates their knowledge. So the main aim is the teaching knowledge, which is what they know already, and the knowledge that they have that influences how they facilitate their classroom. And that is going to influence domain B, which is your instructional strategies. So that is everything that you do in the classroom to facilitate that learning experience. And from those strategies, they're supposed to be able to see how that leads to domain C, which is interactions that take place, the knowledge application, the level of participation, and everything that results from the instructional strategies, such as the learning outcomes and things of that sort. And once after they leave domain C, then they're looking at, okay, these are the strategies I'm using, and this is how these strategies are impacting these students and helping them learn. So what these strategies are working and what's not working. So by the time they get to domain D, they're supposed to have a diagnosis, and they're supposed to be able to see what's working and what's not. And then they're making their way back to that knowledge, and they're gaining more knowledge about how can I make this classroom experience better moving forward. So when we look at the literature, it explains that students have to be engaged in 3 different ways to be successful. So they have to be behaviorally doing their assignments and completing their work. They have to be cognitively able to apply what they're learning to their assignments to demonstrate what they know. And they also have to be effectively engaged. They have to be effectively participating in the learning experience within the classroom. If those things aren't happening, then they're not going to be as successful. Those are the things that lead to a positive learning experience. And those are the things that they have to have themselves. Instructors can influence that, but they can't. Ultimately, it's up to the student whether they have those things within them. It also says that higher levels of self-efficacy can lead to increased hard work and more effort put forth when they're doing their assignments. So self-efficacy, for those that don't know, is just a belief that you have what it takes to get to a certain outcome. So if a student doesn't believe that they can succeed in class, they're not going to put forth that effort. They're more than likely not going to put forth that effort. And that's basically what they're saying here, is that the higher levels of self-efficacy are going to lead to more effort put forth in the classroom. But these are things that students have to have, and that level of engagement and that level of self-efficacy are things that students have to have themselves. Instructors can influence that, but ultimately it's up to the student. But what instructors do have an influence on is the learning practices that take place in the classroom. Students have different learning needs that impact how they learn in the classroom, and instructors have to implement things that accommodate those preferences. More importantly, specifically with the online classes, more specifically, because when they're online, they can't really gauge if students falling asleep. If they're having trouble understanding things, they can't really gauge that as easily as if they're face to face. So the way I've designed this research is a qualitative research study with constructivist epistemology and an interpretivist theoretical perspective. And I designed it that way because it was the best way for me to get rich information from these participants and not have to worry about have the information be from their perspective rather than my interpretation or somebody else's interpretation of what their experiences are. So for the methodological approach, I use multiple sources of information, which means that I use multiple data collection tools to make sure that I got rich information, and also make sure that I got things from the instructor perspective as well as the student perspective, because the instructor perspective of how they see the effectiveness of their strategies in the classroom is different. Might be a little bit different than what students see. So I try to get both perspectives and kind of two sides of each story to try to, and that's what kind of made the data more richer and help the reader. I feel like it helps the reader understand things from a greater perspective. So So for the sampling strategy, I use two different sampling strategies. For the instructors, I use a single stage sampling, and instructors had to have experience teaching an online class and a face-to-face class, and they had to be undergraduate classes, and they had to be teaching on both platforms at that time. So for the students, they had to either be taking an online class or a face-to-face class with one of those instructors. So it was a little bit different. I didn't really have control over the sampling for the students because of the class sizes, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. So for the interviews were strictly for instructors. So they were done usually face-to-face. Actually, all of them were done face-to-face, usually in their office. Sometimes they were done, I had a couple of instructors that had me interview them in the classroom before students got in there. That's how that was typically done. Surveys were done for the online students. They were email surveys, and they had to fill them out online. For the face-to-face classes, I handed out surveys to the students during the observation, either before or after the observation, but to kind of get it out of their way for efficiency and time reasons. Observations were done either face-to-face. The face-to-face classes, they were done right in the classroom, or the online classes. Right after the interview, immediately following the interview, the instructor will walk me through, either in the classroom or in their office, the instructor will walk me through how they facilitate the classroom and all the features of the classroom. So for data collection, interviews were 10 questions. 8 instructors from 4 different colleges, they got the same 10 questions, didn't deviate at all. And for students, they all got the same 8-question survey. So the reason I didn't interview the students is because of the sample size. I didn't really have control of the sample size, and for time reasons, it just was more efficient to do surveys rather than interviews. I couldn't sit down with, obviously I couldn't sit down with hundreds of students, and I didn't really know how many students I would be interviewing, so it just wasn't time efficient for the study. And observations were typically done for an hour if they're face-to-face classes. The online classes were about 20 to 30 minutes. They just do a walkthrough of all the features of the class and just be available to answer any questions. So for the data analysis, I use a 3-step process. So I use the data analysis software to create themes, code the information, and then I translated that to text in the second step. So I wrote all my findings down on paper, and then for the verification, I sent what I found on paper to the instructors so they can verify if everything is correct. And then that goes into goodness and trustworthiness. So in order to make the information more valid, each instructor had a profile that was at least a page that described who they were and their teaching style. And I actually ran that by the instructors so they can verify that information to make sure that's correct. I ran the things by the instructors so they can make sure that information is correct. Just so there's no, to make sure that the information is valid. I had a peer read over my information to have another set of eyes. That's pretty much how I try to ensure that goodness and trustworthiness. I also kept a diary after the interviews and after the observations, and I just wrote down, what I saw. That kind of helped me keep track of the details and make that data a little bit more rich. So at Eagle College, that was the first college I visited. And we had Dr. Chase Stevens, who was a professor in the education department. And what he likes to do is he likes to use different activities to help students learn in multiple ways. Rather than just do one activity throughout class, he likes to do a bunch of different activities throughout each class. Dr. Ryan Fisher was another professor at Eagle, who was in the education department. He explains he has a constructivist teaching style, and he likes to make sure that students are facilitating their own learning process and sharing their ideas and working with each other in groups and kind of building that knowledge off of each other rather than from him. So he's not necessarily facilitating as much, and they're learning from themselves rather than from them. At Mississippi Valley Community College, I had Becky Lewis, who was a math instructor with an economics background, and she likes to help students learn math, and she has a passion for making students enjoy math. she feels like math can be fun, and she wants to show students that. Dr. Jason Hilliard is a history instructor who likes to have the opportunity to build relationships with students and engage them as much as possible. Watching his classroom, that's pretty much what he does, is he engages them the whole time. He didn't really have the opportunity to do that before because he was at HBCU, and he didn't feel like he had that freedom, but he's very excited to be part of Mississippi Valley because he has more of that freedom to do so. At the University of Edgemere, we have Brittany Morris, who is a calculus instructor. She likes to help students, give them an opportunity to demonstrate in class how they solved their own problem in their own way, rather than how they solved it the way she taught them, because it's a way to demonstrate to other students, okay, this is a different way to do it, and they can see, see what the alternatives are and decide which way is best for them. And Kira Thomas is an English instructor who is nearing retirement. She's probably already retired. She's planning on retiring after the past semester, and she does not like to lecture at all, and she doesn't. And instead, she kind of has that constructivist learning style as well, and she likes to let students share their own ideas and learn off of each other rather than learn from her. She feels like they don't need the ideas that are in her head, and they need to build off of their own ideas. At Espinosa University, we have Kendall Benson Williams, who is an English instructor, and she's another instructor that likes that student-driven type of learning, where they're mostly learning through discussion-based activities and group activities, and they're sharing ideas once again from each other. And she doesn't really like to lecture at all either. Hugo Sanders is a German sociology instructor, and he likes to relate ideas, and he likes to relate things in class to his own experience. And watching his classroom, he likes to talk about his own experiences with things to kind of give them a better picture of what certain things mean in the class when he talks about them. And he also likes to go around to students to get them to relate their own experiences as well. So I developed a few themes, which are patterns in the data from these instructors. The first theme was on teaching styles and strategies. So in particular, the first one was on student-centered learning. So like I said earlier, most of the instructors like to give students a chance to collaborate with each other, learn from each other rather than learn from the instructor, so that they're building off of each other's knowledge and they're getting to know each other, and then they're creating their own learning experience. Another strategy was when they take the class material that's discussed and they like to apply it to students' interests, students' strengths, and different experiences, and make things more practical so students can see the big picture and kind of get that buy-in. Okay, this is why this is important. The reason we're learning about the Puritans today is because the Puritans have done things that impact what you do when you get up in the morning. Things of that sort. Just trying to apply it to its importance and then help them understand why things are important and kind of get that buy-in from students. Another thing they provide is that learning support, which is it's different between instructors, but I think they all try to do that in some capacity. So, for example, they might be walking around to groups to make sure that they understand the material and make themselves available to answer questions, address any concerns, they offer feedback. Even in the online class, they try to offer that feedback to make sure that students on the right track. And they offer that effort-based grading. A couple of them offer effort-based grading, which is they grade based on effort rather than the accuracy. So it's not necessarily, they don't grade because you're right, they grade because you're trying to learn and you're moving through a learning process. And that's to encourage students to not feel to demonstrate what they know without feeling like they don't know anything, or they can't get anything right. It's to encourage them that you're going to make mistakes in class, and that's okay. I just want to be able to see that you're trying to demonstrate and move through a learning process. For theme 2, it was on student engagement. So what instructors like to do is connect that class material to students' interests and their strengths to try to get them engaged more, keep that interest. So students aren't with their head down and things of that sort. They're paying more attention, and once again they have that buy-in. They also put them in activities. If the instructor is not relating things to students' experiences or to their own experiences, they try to put students in positions where they can do that themselves. So most instructors try to put students in group activities or give them projects or assignments where they can apply things that so for example, theories learned in class to maybe what they did over the weekend. You know what I mean? To kind of get them interested in okay, I'm going to participate because it's kind of interests me now. You know what I mean? So for theme three was about implementing things that are going to address learning preferences and students' learning needs to help them learn more effectively. So to do that, they try to identify what students, what's keeping the students engaged, what's helping them learn more effectively in the classroom in different ways. And so, for example, they identified that students don't like lecture very much. So what they do is they limit the amount of time that they lecture, or they try to space out the time that they lecture. So they might lecture for 10 minutes in the beginning of class, and then they move on to a couple other activities, and then they go back to lecturing for another 5 minutes, kind of space it out to keep students from falling asleep, you know what I mean? Another thing to do is they try to build a sense of community within the classroom to keep students engaged and to help them learn from each other and to encourage them to interact with each other and learn from each other and ask each other questions if they need to, because students want that. They're identifying the students want that engagement and they want opportunities to engage. So they put them in discussions and activities where they can interact with each other as much as possible. So there was a little lag there. But for my observations, what I did was I took themes, that aspects of the themes, and I just listed them here if I saw them in either classroom, online or face-to-face. So what I realized is that students are seeing that instructors are taking course material and they're applying it to real-world examples. Also, what they're doing is they're providing that learning support. So they're asking questions to check that understanding and making sure, what is, you guys know what theory X is? We talked about that yesterday. How much to kind of gauge what they understand. They offer that feedback. They go around to different groups to make sure, that they're on the right track and things like that. So there were a lot of group activities. That's probably the most frequent activity I saw when I was in these classrooms. Even in the online classroom, they implemented a lot of group activities to get students to interact. So more observations that I saw was they didn't use much lecture. I didn't see much lecture at all, and if I did, they had a PowerPoint on for a very brief period of time, and then they just moved on to other activities, probably to keep students awake. They spend a lot of time alternating between lecture and other activities to kind of mix things up. And that's most of what I saw during the observations. They try to accommodate students in different ways to keep them engaged. So for my student participants, I had 123 in total. Most of them were face-to-face students. Not many of them were online. I got at least 31. So the information here just describes the first 3 survey questions, which are demographic questions. So we can see here that most of the students were white, 18 to 19-year-old freshmen. Keep in mind that most of them provided more than one response to each question. So it's probably one thing just to think about. When we move to the next 5 questions, because there were 8 in total, we see that the students were asked that what type of learning experiences increase your understanding of course material. Most of them said hands-on. They like hands-on activities. They like the discussions that allow them to interact with each other, and they like those visual aids, when they can just kind of get a better picture of in their mind of what instructors are talking about. So then they're asked what strategies did you use personally to help yourself learn and succeed in classes? And most of them said they take notes. And this question is specific to online. So students said they take notes, they read the textbook, or they reread their material to get themselves more familiar, and that's how they help themselves study. And they also use a planner or calendar to keep track of due dates. Then they're asked, how do you feel about the way your instructor is presenting the information in your classes currently? Most of them were already content. They said their instructor is already helpful. I like that's the way it is. The instructor does a pretty good job. Some of them, but there are also some that said there is some room for improvement in different ways. they were asked, what specific activities do you prefer to be included in class? And most of them said group work or opportunities where they can interact, such as discussions. Some of them said, I'm fine with the class the way it is, and I don't think there's anything that needs to be added. And then finally, they were asked about if there are any aspects about course delivery that will help you guys pass. Most of them said it's fine the way it is. Once again, some of them said I need the instructor to be more clear. I need him to explain things a little bit better. I need a little bit more direction. Some said I just need more time to study. I don't really have that much time to prepare. So that's pretty much the results of the survey questions. So when we go back to the research question, what teaching strategies are used to foster engagement and ensure that students are reaching particular learning outcomes in online and face-to-face classrooms? For theme 1, the instructors have been encouraging students to learn, engage, and learn from each other through those student-centered learning activities. They've been applying different activities, or they've been applying the class material to why it matters. They've been helping students, they've been demonstrating why theory X is important to your life, or why it's important, what it means when you do X, Y, Z, to help them understand it, to keep them paying more attention and understanding things better. They've been providing that learning support. They've been asking questions to make sure that students are understanding things to a certain point. They've been offering that feedback, making sure students are on the right track, and they offer that effort-based grading to encourage students to put forth, to work through your learning process, your own learning process, without feeling like what you say is not smart, or feeling like you can't do anything right. To encourage them to make mistakes, and that is how we learn. We make mistakes through learning. So for theme 2 answers the question by when instructors are taking things, whether it be concept learning we talked about yesterday. So for example, we're going to talk about theory X that we talked about in the last 5 minutes, and we're going to take that theory and we're going to apply it to what you guys did over the weekend. We're going to apply it to, okay, you guys like basketball? We're going to talk about basketball and how it applies to theory X. So keep students engaged and keep them learning that way. Okay, this is why it's important, is because when I'm playing basketball, okay, this is why theory X is so important. They've been identifying for theme 3, they've been identifying what students want to see more in class and what are going to help students learn more effectively, and they've been implementing those strategies more often and making adjustments as necessary to the original, to the way they facilitate originally. So what this study ultimately means is it expands on the research on strategies that keep students engaged. It should expand on research on things that are used to help students learn more effectively, and on the research on strategies that help students that just help students understand the concepts discussed in class. And these things this study should ultimately help instructors determine what they can do moving forward to make the classroom more productive. A major delimitation for the study was just the class sizes. That was actually a limitation. But a delimitation was the fact that the instructors, the information provided in the study it's not necessarily reflective of other institutions. What they provide might be a little bit different. Also, what instructors had to offer if they were teaching strictly online or teaching strictly face-to-face. They can provide some decent information, but for the purposes of this study and for observation purposes, it just wasn't time efficient. Some major limitations were the class sizes. I wasn't able to determine how many students I was going to include in the study. I didn't have control over that. And because I surveyed students, it made it hard for me to get those nonverbal cues, like their facial expressions and their hand gestures, that make the data more rich. So recommendations for practice for faculty, try to get that feedback from students as much as possible so that you can identify what students are needing more in the classroom that can help you make the classroom more productive. For institutions, this is a little bit of a stretch, but if they can give instructors the technology that they need to be more successful in the classroom, to help students learn more effectively. This is, once again, it's a little stretch, but might not be very cost effective. But a couple of instructors talked about some ideas they had in the classroom, some creative ideas to make their classroom more effective, but they couldn't really do that because they don't have things such as, for example, a learning management system like Blackboard. It doesn't allow them to do things, for example, in online class that they know they can use to make the classroom better. But because of the technology they have, they can't really do that. So for students, when they get the opportunity to provide feedback, they should do that as much as they can so that they give the instructors a chance to accommodate their needs. Also, the individual learning strategies that they use at home, studying, and things of that sort to prepare for class that they already use to supplement the learning that takes place in the classroom, they should continue to work on those strategies. So for further research, I would say instructors should look at specific, well, not instructors, but researchers should look at specific strategies and how they, for example, how does this group activity help students? How does this group activity help students understand? Help students get to outcome X outlined in the syllabus. You know what I mean? How does it specifically help? How does this group activity specifically help students get to demonstrate that they understand X, Y, Z outlined in the syllabus, the course outlines, the course outcomes that are outlined in the syllabus. Also, they should look at strategies. Researchers can look at strategies and how they strategies to identify students' needs in online and face-to-face classrooms. So a couple of instructors talked about, I try to get feedback from students, but in the online classroom, it's kind of hard because they don't really talk much. But there's some specific strategies that they do use, and other instructors that aren't included in the study might use some strategies that help them identify what's keeping these students from falling asleep, what's helping these students pay more attention, things of that sort. All right, any questions?
Thank you very much.